That's definitely needs a readjustment. Alright. So, I just bailed on a game of La Foi et le Glaive. This is piles and piles of order sheets. This is a game that obviously, I picked up more because of the company. Azure Wish. Got a collection of them, and it's grown a little bit this year. And, in some sense, grabbing that is of more importance than actually getting good games from the company. I may not really count on it. In this case, what do I have? Well, I have something that I probably would not have bought from any other company based on what it is. It's a diplomacy game. It's a modified diplomacy. Yes, it's got a significant difference with this religious map that operates completely differently from the diplomacy style games. But when it comes down to it, you're playing a diplomacy game with an additional vector to base your strategy on. Your goal is the religious side. It can help you obtaining military goals, but in the end it is making those military moves and the negotiations that allow them to happen properly that really kind of fuels this game. Placing the pieces secretly for the religious and then kind of pairing them off and destroying them is a much, much weaker sort of mechanism than is present in the diplomacy side that's covered over here on the main military map. Well, alright, so given that, as a diplomacy game, I fear that it's not going to be terribly pleasing to most diplomacy players. First thing, components. This is Azure Wish components. You've got a map that looks like it was produced kind of poorly by a computer graphics and kind of not at a good resolution. Like the map was blown up beyond what it was designed at. You've got these ultra thin counters, again all standard for them. A rulebook that isn't too bad actually. The company's definitely done better. Well, it's definitely done worse than this. I don't know if it's done terribly better. It's a good, it's got its little issues, but overall I think it's understandable. It doesn't hurt that this is, essentially diplomacy, and where you see something that doesn't seem quite right, you can look it over again and say, wait a minute, why is this different from diplomacy? Oh no, it is actually the same. It's just their wording was a little more different. These little player aid sheets, which are really the orders charts. They're just a bunch of copies of that. Usually in their games that I've got, you've got a big set of charts and tables that come like this. In this case, no. This did come with the French rolls, which look a little, they have examples of play, some suggestions on strategy, etc. But, I don't know how much strategy you really need. Again, if you're familiar with diplomacy, this becomes just a modification to it. So, again, how is it as a modification to diplomacy? Well, between the components, the added religious rules, which add a lot to the game, but they also add a lot of maintenance and upkeep in terms of flipping counters, counting all kind of stuff. The mechanism for them is not as appealing as the base diplomacy mechanism, but it's nice to have them in two different directions, two different formats, where one is just, hey, put the pieces in there and count them up almost like a bidding type situation and destroy them. And then the other is really that diplomacy thing I find that a nice mixture. I find the play of the game very appealing. I just find that the counting and keeping everything in the correct state is difficult. And especially Solitaire, where I don't have anybody to help me. Looking through, all of Europe and the Middle East and trying to find, try to make sure that I get all the correct losses from conflicts between the priests, the people, the military, and one another, and then all the proper conversions. That's a very, very painful process. It's already not the easiest thing in the world to keep track of the military side of things when there's as many pieces on the board as there potentially is in this. You have the same issue with, say, Youngstown or something like that. There's no problem there. But unfortunately, I feel like this is probably going to reach beyond what most dip players really want. Most of them don't mind a little modification, a bigger game of dip, whatever, but they probably don't really want something that adds this much pain in the ass factor. On the other hand, non-dip players, let's take, your simulation gamer. This isn't a simulation at all. This is a dip game. It's not trying to model these the religious conflicts terribly well, any more than diplomacy is trying to model World War I by starting in 1901. And we'll leave that alone. We'll leave that for when we actually do diplomacy. Yeah? But yeah, as a looking at this in any sense from a historical perspective, as a model of some sort of insight into the growth of the religions, it's worthless. It really is. It has some interesting background. It's themed in the way a lot of Euros are, but it doesn't really represent the reality in any strong and useful way. So then, yeah, you might get, it might be appealing to some people who want a different flavor of dip, and when it came out, it was probably a reasonable price, especially in Europe for that. Here, I never saw it, and I saw a couple of companies, or a couple of stores that carried Azura-Wish stuff. I never saw this actually available in the US. The rules that I have for it in English look almost like something that was run off as an afterthought. Given that the box comes with the French rules, and I've never seen another Azura-Wish game come with both English and French, I'm wondering if maybe this was something that was available maybe just in a very limited fashion or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, given its rarity, etc., it's going to be really tough to find a copy at a particularly reasonable price. I didn't pay a fortune for it by any means. On the other hand, I paid as much as I would for a new kind of biggish war game. And you're not getting as much in it. So you're going to pay a premium for the rarity, especially compared to the components that you're getting. In a lot of ways, one would almost say, gee, this would make more sense to do as a print and play, especially since it's lacking in enough components. There aren't enough markers for the cities, that's for certain. Beyond that, well, it would be nice to have more of the religious markers, especially the big ones that could cover more areas. But you're going to have to make your own pieces. There's also the simple fact that the cities, where I had to mark them so that I could differentiate between one that's loyal and will be used almost as a home country in diplomacy, home country cities, and one that's recently captured and you haven't converted the religious people over yet. That's a distinguishment that just isn't made in the counter set, and it's one that I think is very important. And there's no indication of how to note that in your play. As a solitaire game for me, it's not terribly good. Diplomacy never really is. Sometimes I'm in the mood for it, and to tell you the truth, if I want to play a diplomacy game, solitaire, I just want to break open diplomacy because it's easier, it's lighter, it's a small board. I can get it over with quicker. And it's not, it's never really, I don't think I've ever actually even finished a game of diplomacy solo. It suffers not from the diplomacy syndrome, I think. I don't think it's going to collapse into buddy dip. I think, like with Machiavelli, because it's got a fixed victory point limit, it's going to actually hit stasis, where anytime a player starts to get to the point where they're coming close to winning, whatever's left, however many players are left, assuming there's at least two other significant players, are going to step in and stop them. And it's just going to constantly be that dynamic. And that's what we saw. I gave up because I'm just not seeing where the game's going to end, simply because, especially in this game, but because of that balance of power dynamic. But in this game it gets worse because there's this huge span between the amount of victory points where maybe you're clearly in the lead in a three-player game and the amount of victory points you actually need to win. It was a good 20 religious thirds more that had to be gotten by Islam. And I just don't see you sneaking up to that level without people saying, we can stop them now. Anyway, I'm not terribly disappointed just because I did want it for my collection. If I was in the situation where I had a gaming group like I used to, I'm sure I could get this played. There were people who loved diplomacy and would have been willing to try a variant that's very different from anything they'd seen before. On the other hand, today's modern gamer, I don't know if they have the patience for something like this, and it's not going to appeal to the wargaming sect, as I've already noted. I mean, you look at how diplomacy kind of fares on Board Game Geek, and it's kind of sad to see such an absolute classic relegated to a fairly low place in the rankings. And it's kind of not even seen as a game because you're not as restricted. It's not a matter of like trying to play the game and beat your opponents. It's playing your opponents to beat themselves or to beat each other. The game is just there as a framework for playing opponents. And I think games where you play against your opponents very directly like that, I mean, this is more direct than any war game, where you're making negotiations, you don't have a lot there. There aren't any die rolls. There aren't any clever economic engines to devise. All you got is one player talking to the others and saying, look, this is how we can both get an advantage, even though eventually we'll have to fight each other. The unfortunate thing in diplomacy, though, has always been, for me, the buddy dip. Basically, there's a dichotomy. You either have the buddy dip, or you have the balance of power that cannot be broken. When you have buddy dip, it's very easy. Yeah, you can come to an agreement, and 2 people, 3 people can win the game together and say, yep, there we go. When you have Machiavelli or this game, where there's a reachable victory condition alone, then you kind of have this much you have a dynamic that just will never allow it to end because it's so free and loose that two people can gang up and stop the third at any time. And you see that in a lot of three-player games. Well, in Diplomacy or its ilk, the game just will devolve into that for the most part, unless they can seal some sort of alliance forever and ever and ever, and actually stick to it. Somehow that happens more in depth than a game of this nature. Anyway, that's about my thoughts on this. The next thing, I don't know. I've got a few things that I've played recently with my wife. So, Unhappy King Charles is definitely on the waiting deck, as is Red November, and of course there's still some SPQR to go.